Sorry about that. My video got cut off on me as I was talking about stippling, which is a great effect for the mala beads that I have here. So I was moving my pencil up and down, trying to explore a variety of kind of mark making. The stippling idea, I'm pushing the pencil into my paper with the point of it. And then I'll push it back with my blending stump in areas where I'm like, there's too much. I don't like all of it, but I think it needs a little bit more. That's how I work my mala beads. But back to my mammoth tusk, which as you can see I went a little bit further ahead because I thought I was still recording. That's okay, it happens. So I built my values here and thinking about my darks and lights and how they relate to other areas within my drawing. It's very important. You don't want to apply your texture, your detail, and everything to one object without seeing how dark does this object get? How dark does that object get? Am I going dark enough? Am I going too dark? Can I still remove that if I have to? So it's good. So I'm applying the value around. That's good to do before you actually start to bring in that texture idea. So to get to my texture, I think about line quality. So there's these beautiful little grooves and crevices along my values that I found. And that's how I started to kind of establish the sections within my drawing that helped me figure out within this mammoth tusk, there's so much going on. How can I minimize my confusion and just find little shapes? So this whole shape I started to layer in value. And again, I'm moving my blending stump to go back and forth and also with a little bit of a curve to it so it starts to mimic the form of this mammoth tusk as it moves into space. And then to get these beautiful highlights, I apply my kneaded eraser or regular eraser right along that line or wherever I feel like I want that highlight. And it's actually a very nice, beautiful, stark light right there. So I'm going to bring in my blending stump and kind of push in whatever's stuck onto it so that this area right here is a little bit darker right next to my light. So that's a way to make a light lighter is by darkening the area next to it. You can always erase to get light, but you can also just find the area next to it and darken that up. So as you can see, my line quality gets a little thicker and thinner in areas. That's important to describe this texture of the grain. And then you can see up here these tiny little lines. They're very small. Almost when I squint, I lose them. So as I look at this still life, because I'm working from a still life from life, I squint my eyes so I can see the overall values, and I'm not hung up on all the detail. That helps me apply the darks and lights and that variety of value around my drawing before I start to get into those details, those little nuances of texture that make all of these objects their own. So I'm squinting my eyes. It looks like this area is actually a little bit lighter. So let me pull that value back up. Oh, and I was showing you how to find a highlight. So again, I have this value and I take my kneaded eraser, find the point of it, and I just drag it across to get to that highlight. I can even go back with a more stable, sturdy eraser if I want to. If I don't like the way that looks, I can just always push it back, adding more pencil there, pigment, or just even using my blending stump. I kind of like that. Even though this doesn't belong, it's kind of nice because I pushed it back, but it's still visible. So it adds a little bit of element of more variety and value there, which is nice. So I layered in a linear way, applying my lines back and forth, and then I pushed it in with my blending stump. And you can see I left spaces open so that I can use the white of the paper, and I can always erase it if I want to. This area right here is pretty gnarly. It's the edge of this mammoth tusk, so it's kind of exposed and raw and rough, and so I'm gonna sort of leave some of these crazy lines, these irregular lines, and I even move my pencil sometimes, twist it around in my hand so that I find this irregular line without me so arbitrarily trying to draw it in there. And even though it's light, I'm going to add a little bit of linear hatching, and then I'm going to pull that value up. So one way to make this look lighter, as I was just saying, is applying the value next to it to be darker. And I haven't actually added this yet. sometimes I don't like to drag my hand across my drawing, and I will layer some sort of paper underneath it if I have to, so as I draw, here I can show you. As I draw, I'm not dragging my hand and pulling up all that beautiful work I just did, so I can always add a piece of paper underneath my hand. But that's why I've kind of left this area a little bit untouched, because I didn't want to keep dragging my hand across it. But I can always use that technique of an extra piece of paper, any kind of paper, printer paper, sketchbook paper, whatever kind of paper you have, something that doesn't have any artwork on it, so it doesn't compromise the work you're working on now by somehow picking it up. So the way I'm lightening this edge of my mammoth tusk is by finding this beautiful shadow. This is really deep and dark. This is my background back here. It's back here and back here, and so this is very far back into my still life. And so it's very dark back there, which is nice because it's automatically going to pull out this seashell, and it's automatically going to pull out the edge of my ocean jasper. Okay, so as you can see, I started to build my texture within my mammoth tusk. I'm going to move on to my seashell and my ocean jasper next. I'm not fully done with describing all of this in here. Actually, I can go a little bit further because I probably haven't taken up too much of your time yet. But, so I found my pencil. This is a 6B. I could go probably lighter. I could probably just go with a 2B. But I'm looking at this kind of line work. It's a little bit lighter in here. So I'm actually going to pull up, before I start working on the line work, pull up some of this value. And you see how I've left these lines here. That's kind of what's going on. There's a lot of these long vertical lines that are running through. But in this area, like I said, it's kind of gnarly. So I'm going to find this irregular shaped line and apply it. And then I can even push it back a little bit if I don't like the way that looks, remembering to follow the form of my object. But like I said, this area is a little bit gnarlier. There's a beautiful highlight right here that I'll pull in, and then I'll kind of find that line again to define this area. Come back with my sturdier eraser. So I'm constantly looking back at my objects because, again, I'm drawing from life, so I don't have this mental picture. I have this idea, and it's good to move away from it at some points, but also this is, you know, a drawing from observation, so I want to be observing all of the objects that I need to be applying here. And we're thinking about realism. We're thinking about not allowing the objects to sit with a line defining them, but allowing the objects to sit next to each other with a value defining them. So this is lighter than this area. This is darker than this area. I don't have a line to define it. Here I do, but that's because I haven't really pushed that in yet. Here I do as well, but let me show you how I get rid of that. So the edge of this wood is actually pretty dark. It's darker than the background, so I'm actually going to just push this edge of this line a little darker, which starts to flatten this out, right? If you have a dark outline around an object, it really flattens that object out a lot. So I think that's because I need to bring in a couple more dark contrasted areas in here in the actual mammoth tusk itself. It looks like it gets a bit darker in here. But behind the space, it's dark, but it's not as dark as that. But the line also, since it's moving closer to me, it's not as blurred as it should be. So that's one thing to think about as well is the edges of your object. Are they blurry or are they crisp and sharp? Can you see all of the details, or do they move back in space, and should you actually define them with a blurrier edge? Like this edge back here of my fur scarf, it's actually blurred because it's the furthest thing away from me, and it's fur, so it's not going to really have any really harsh line defining it. It's just going to have kind of more hair details coming off of it into the background. So I'm going to push this, and I'm probably going to leave it pretty blended. I don't really want too much texture there, so I'll overlap my lines in a cross-hashing fashion so that I'm starting to push back this background in relation to that dark line I just found. But the line's even darker. The edge of that mammoth tusk is much darker than the actual background, so I need to leave that dark. And what it looks like is there's this casted shadow in the background, but there's still this kind of light area because the background is white. There's a white piece of paper there, but the casted shadow starts to make it very dark back there. And the light's obviously not hitting it at all directly. So I don't lose this, I'm going to pull back that edge again because that's an important part of my object and I don't want to lose it to the background value I just found. So I'm going to keep working on this gnarly area of texture. I'm going to be layering linearly my lines back and forth. I can cross-hatch a little too, and I can also leave that if I want. If I want to leave the integrity of those lines to bring in the texture, emphasize that texture of wood grain, you certainly can, but it's a mammoth tusk, so it's a little smoother, I want to say, than actual wood grain. And down here it's kind of beautiful highlights. So I'll keep going through and I'll start to build up some of these little shapes I found, getting darker in them and kind of following them around with a little bit of a darker line, leaving the inside of the shape lighter, the white of the paper. And I can even pull up a little bit some of those marks. But this area, like I said, is really what is the most textured. Everything else has these kind of nice linear grooves inside that start to show these little openings, these crevices. Here's another highlight. So I layer in that beautiful value and then I can pull it out with my eraser. Or I can define that shape before I add my value and don't go over it with my pencil at all. There are multiple ways to reaching a similar outcome in a drawing. So have fun with it. Take your time, but also don't get too hung up on all the details right away. Really start to work the value so you have a good understanding of where all those are going within the drawing before you start to bring in your texture. I hope you enjoyed.